Welcome to Western Wisconsin Journal. I like to promote the arts, as you know, and I'm Bobby Pominville. And today I'm promoting a book from a local author, Gary Porter. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Thank you, Bobby. Appreciate this opportunity to talk about Duffy.
And I'm a dog lover and a very much promoter of reading. So as I have learned to know a little bit more about this book, I've been so impressed. It's a delightful book, and I think our audience is really going to enjoy learning about it.
Terrific.
So let's start out with what inspired you to start writing books.
Well, Bobby, I've always enjoyed writing from as long back as I can remember, and I actually started writing textbooks. I was an accounting professor for over 30 years, taught at a number of universities around the country, and midway through my career I began writing textbooks, and I think of textbooks as a way to explain important topics to students in a way that they can understand. So that was my initial kind of endeavor in writing, was with the textbooks, and from there I found that I had more creative ideas that I wanted to express. And so I saw that as a natural extension. Sometimes people ask the question, well, you know, the connection between writing academic types of books and creative writing, and I don't view them as that much different. In fact, I think you're still trying to explain something to somebody in a creative book of this sort. You're trying to express an idea to them, and that's exactly what I tried to do. In addition to the textbooks, when I got into the creative writing, I started writing essays, and I wrote a number of essays for my hometown newspaper back in Iowa, where I came from, a small town in southwest Iowa, and I wrote a number of essays for them. Eventually, actually after the Duffy book was out, I wrote an essay about my hometown that was part of the River Falls, Wisconsin Community Reads program, and I was thrilled to win first place in that contest. So that's something that I've enjoyed doing, is the creative writing.
Oh, I think that's such a great thing to combine those two areas, and the power of writing a book. I can't imagine getting the inspiration for that, but I think you knew Duffy, and Duffy was your dog.
Yes, he was.
So that must have really inspired you.
Well, it did, and what really brought this book about was Duffy was our first adopted dog. My wife and I do not have children of the two-legged variety, only the four-legged variety. And we started adopting dogs quite a few years back, and our first adopted dog was Duffy. He was from a shelter outside of Chicago where we lived at the time, and he became, as you know, being a dog lover, a part of our family. And he was our kid, so to speak, and he lived with us, traveled with us, moved with us, and we had him for 14 years. He went everywhere with us. He never flew. He was never on an airplane. But other than that, he was in the back seat with us everywhere we went. And so he lived with us, as I said, for 14 years. He made the move when we left the Chicago area. I took a position at a school in Montana, and he moved out there with us to Montana and had some exciting experiences, which I write about, with the wildlife in Montana, with the elk and the coyotes, and he came face to face with some. So said he came back to this area then. When we moved back to the Midwest, I took a job at a university here in the Twin Cities, and he came back here with us, lived with us for the last few months of his life here in Hudson before he passed on. So that's where the inspiration came from for the Duffy book.
I think that's just a wonderful tribute. And you know, the terrier breed, they are so interesting, so delightful. So I can imagine the wildlife. They're very self-assured, and I'm sure he had a wonderful time with that.
Well, as Duffy explains in the book, and I will talk maybe in a bit about him using his voice to write this book, but as he explains, terrier comes from terra, which means in Latin earth dog. And he was an earth dog. His nose was always buried in the holes, and I can remember when we first moved out to Montana, the very first time we took him out for a run, he discovered a den of coyote pups alongside the road, and he found out that the mother coyote was going to be very protective and kept us at a distance from her little pups, her coyote pups. So, but again, terrier, Terra, earth dog, he explored everything. And as you may know from being a dog lover as well, they all have their personalities. And he had a very distinctive personality, which frankly made it relatively easy for me to write his story in his voice, because I had such a feel after all of those years of what his personality was really like.
Yes, yes. And the quotes in the book and the way you've described what happened to him, and you know, the way you've written about how he thinks, I found that just endearing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I made a decision early on that I was going to write the book from his point of view, using his voice. Let me just back up maybe a little bit of the background.
Sure.
When you lose a dog, as we all know, it's a very traumatic experience, especially when they're, as we call it, as our kid, as our only son. And when we lost him shortly after moving here to Hudson, I started just thinking about his life, and as I think a lot of people do this, whether it's the loss of a human friend or a relative, or whether it's a family pet, you find that therapeutic value in writing things down. And so shortly after we'd lost him, within weeks, my wife Melissa had given me a journal, and that seemed appropriate, by the way, from an accounting professor to be writing in a journal and making journal entries. But I started keeping a journal. She got this from the Three Dog Bakery, of all places, and there are entries in here that I made very early on after we'd lost him, just talking about what it was like to lose this this dear member of your family, and like I said, about the various experiences he had. We're runners, so we talked about, I jotted down the various running events he used to go to with us, and all the various activities and so forth. And frankly, as you can well imagine, I found it cathartic. I found it a very healing sort of a process to write about him. Well, before long, Duffy lived a suburban life, and I thought, he's got to have some more adventures besides just meeting face to face with the coyote. Some of the other neat things that he did with us. There needs to be another element to this story, and this is when I started, as I like to explain, especially to the kids, mixing fact with fiction. So if we're going to talk about a dog in his voice, and by the way, going off to heaven right at the beginning, then it's obviously got this fictional element to it. So it was a real mixing of fact and fiction. I can talk a little bit more as we go along about how he starts out and who he meets when he goes off to heaven.
Oh, and I've read excerpts, and a little bit later I'm going to ask you to read one.
Be happy to.
But I was just wondering, what was the most surprising outcome from writing this book?
Well, I have to say that the most surprising outcome was the reaction from the young kids in the elementary schools. As my wife, who's also the publicist, she spent her career with IBM in sales and marketing for 32 years, and she has been the driving force behind all of the marketing and the publicity for Duffy. And what she likes to tell people is that Duffy's story is really one for dog lovers of all ages, as she says, from 8 to 80, whatever ages. Well, when you say what was the most surprising outcome of the book, since it's been out about a year and a half now, I'd have to say the reaction from the kids. Now, I have a feeling that some of that was just from me having been a teacher all the years that I was, that I taught in the classroom. It was at the college level, but a teacher's a teacher, right? As you well know.
That's true, and you never lose that love of teaching.
That's right, and as you having been one yourself can appreciate that you're teaching in whatever you do, whether it's talking with someone, whether you're tutoring, whether you're writing a book, textbook, or a creative book of this sort. You're trying to educate somebody about something.
That's
so
right.
In terms of the surprise that came, it was when we started working with the elementary schools, and particularly with the Prairie Elementary here in Hudson. One of our neighbors, Mrs. Derrick, taught at the Prairie Elementary School in the third grade and invited us last year, very shortly after the book came out, to come in and talk with not only the third graders but also the fourth and fifth graders about the book and the process of writing a book. And what they do in this school, and I'm sure a lot of the schools around Wisconsin, is they have a writer's workshop where they have to essentially write their own personal narratives and talk about themselves in a story. Well, little did I know that this is exactly what I was doing with Duffy. If I could give you a little bit of the background, as you found out in the first chapter, Duffy goes off to heaven right away. As I say, we get that out of the way. We don't have to wait all the way through the book to find out if he's going to die. I started the book that way with him, his last day on earth, and then going off to heaven. And he gets up there and he feels now all of a sudden sad and grieving, but also feeling like he ought to try and get his story back to his parents and let them know that he arrived safely and that he's okay. Well, what happens right away? He meets Rex, and Rex is a Boston Terrier. And I had this notion right at the beginning, it hit me as sometimes these things do. Rex is a Boston Terrier, so being from out east, he's quite literary. And so the idea I hit on early on in this part of the book was, well, Rex ought to be his agent. He ought to be the one that helps him figure out how to get this book back to Earth. And when I read a little bit from chapter 1 towards the end here, you'll see that notion of how the two of them scheme and go about figuring out how they're going to write this. And what I found is that the students in the elementary school are going through the same process of figuring out the genre. Is it going to be a personal narrative or a autobiography? And they're learning about the various literary devices that Duff and Rex talk about how you can use alliteration and how you can use homophones to spice up your writing, and all what they call their toolkit in the writer's workshop.
So that's perfect for that age.
It really was.
It is.
It's really worked out very well. We've had just incredible response from school kids.
That's wonderful. So that's just a wonderful outcome, and I didn't know if you wanted to mention, but the children even wrote you some thank yous.
They did.
And that is just wonderful when you get comments from children.
Well, and I know you appreciate this. I showed this to you prior to coming on. And being a teacher yourself, it has to be the most touching experience I've had since the book has been out. I've talked with pet lovers of all ages who've lost their pets and people that come into the bookstores and libraries. But when the students presented me with this copy of their reflections, each of them drew some pictures and then wrote some things about the book itself and about their reaction to reading about Duffy. They gave this to my wife and I after we'd been there for the workshop, and this is a treasure, and it's probably, like I said, the most touching moment I've had since the book was written.
Well, not only that, but they're so sincere, and their comments are really so right on. And then the thought that you really help teach them to go a little further with reading and writing.
Yeah,
and you know, when people can express themselves in writing, that's a tough thing for a lot of people.
It really is, and to feel as if you've had some influence and touched them.
That's wonderful.
Process of doing this, I said, it's meant a lot to me.
I have to say that had to be one of the best experiences for you too.
Absolutely, it really was.
Because they really, I know how children are, they just love anyone that comes to visit.
That's right. Well, you know, and it's interesting too when you talk about what surprised you or things that happen when you write a book. And it's something that came, this was very early in the process, but something that just happened the other day. You hand out a bookmark, or I should say my wife Melissa hands out a bookmark at one of these events. It happened to be out at a Petapalooza here in Roberts just a few weeks ago. and she gave a bookmark to somebody. So happened that person works in the Hudson post office. She read the book, passed it on to another person in the post office who happens to be our mail carrier. Well, just a few days ago, the mail carrier comes by with the nicest thank you note, essentially, written by both her and her friend in the post office, telling me just how much they enjoyed the book. And kind of both sides there, the kids as well as adults. I've said this to Melissa a number of times. To have someone come up to you in either form, and the kids with this spiral-bound book or this note card, that is really what makes writing a book of this sort worth the whole process.
And what you've done is you've written something that appeals to so many ages and so many people. And I know I'm inspired to read the rest of it at this point. I've just read excerpts myself. But that first chapter is it just spoke to me. It's so delightful.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job, Gary.
Well, what happens, I should just maybe expound a little bit on this story. They start out in heaven in chapter 1, and they talk, as I'm going to read about a little bit, about how they're going to go about this and what kind of a story it ought to be. And then pretty much Rex says, I'll take care of figuring out how to get this book published and talk to some people down on Earth. You go off and write your story. So a lot of the chapters from then on out, Bobby, are essentially Duffy telling his story of his time on Earth with, as he called them, his folks, Melissa and I. And so he tells his story. Every few chapters then, there's an interjection. There's a chapter from heaven, and those are updates. Those are where Duffy then kind of reports in his voice how him and Rex are coming along. And as I've talked with the students about, there have to be, if you're going to write a story and hold the reader's interest, there have to be some ups and downs, some times when you're not really sure how things are going to turn out. So this story within the story of, are we ever going to get this book published, is another part of this that is intended, is on my part, to hold the reader's interest and keep them guessing as to what's going to happen towards the end.
That's perfect, because we don't know the answer.
We don't know till we
got to find out.
That's right.
I like that a lot. And as a little sidebar, did you have trouble getting your book published?
This book.
This book.
Publishing a book is always a challenge. I think any author you talk to will tell you that the process of writing the book is one thing. Because a lot of times get that question of, it comes up almost invariably in the 50 or 60 some events that we've had with the book over the last year and a half. Invariably, and we chuckle about it, Melissa and I, the question always comes up, how long did it take you to write this book? And it's a fair question, but it's not an easy question, because there was the time of, as I'll say, composing the book and figuring out Rex is going to be part of this, and here's the story within the story. But there's also that whole, as I talk with the students about, the process of getting it published, truly getting it published here on Earth. And there is that part to it, finding a publisher and eventually going through an editing process. And this book has, at the start of each chapter, some illustrations. So I worked with both an illustrator and a designer.
Oh, yes, right.
And I'm not, as I tell people, I am not an artist. I'm a writer, and I feel that's part of art. But what I did was I wrote a caption to start off, as I referred to it when I talked with the illustrator, to capture the spirit of each of the chapters. And so I have a short caption that starts off each one, and then it was up to the illustrator to match that up, to draw something lighthearted. It's a relatively humorous book, is its intent, as told by a dog. And so it was up to the illustrator then to capture the spirit of that. So there's that part of getting a book published, of working with a designer, working with an illustrator, the editor, and it takes time.
Oh, yes, and I think the illustrations are really enhance the book
Thank
a
you
lot.
very
I like
much.
it. Very nice. And it's kind of interesting to hear you talk about that. So do you want to go to the excerpt now?
I can talk, yeah, I can read a little bit
Would
from
you
the-
like to just introduce it to us a
Sure.
little bit?
Yeah.
We'll hear a little bit of the book.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, Duffy gets to heaven after his journey up there. He dies at the very outset of the book and goes off to heaven, and he meets this Boston Terrier Rex who comes trotting down the road. This is all in the writer's mind. He pictures things, and he says, here comes Rex trotting down the road. Duffy's feeling a little down, also confused where he's at. So he meets Rex, and Rex can tell Duffy is kind of down about just leaving these people he spent the last 14 years with. And so after Duff explains that he'd like to get his story back to Earth, Rex starts questioning him, and he starts asking a lot of questions. Duff gets a little bit, I don't know if you say irritated at first, with all these interrogation almost. Why you were actually asking me all these questions? And Rex says, well, your readers are going to need to know what kind of story is this going to be. Duff explains, well, it's my life story. That's what it is. Because at this point, Duffy knows nothing about autobiographies, memoirs, and all these things Rex, being from out east, knows about. So Rex starts talking to him about the various genres, which, as I said, these elementary school kids know all about. So before long, Rex decides, no, you know, I don't know if this can be an autobiography. I normally think of those as written by famous people, jet setters, ex-presidents, that sort of thing. Okay, Duff says, that's fine. We won't go with autobiography. Well, I've heard about memoirs. Would maybe my story be a memoir? And Rex says, well, it could be, but you know, you got to be careful with memoirs. There's been a lot of talk recently how people write these and then they're on these talk shows and they kind of get nailed down. Did this really happen or not happen? And you know, you don't want to get any hot water, Duff, here. So no, I don't think we want to call it a memoir. So that's kind of the setup, Bobby, to a little couple pages I'm going to read here because they're trying to decide, and at this point Duff's really got to rely on Rex as the expert in this. And so this is a short passage in the chapter on heaven in which they're having this discussion, and it starts off, and this is all Duff's voice with him and Rex having a conversation. Well, for the longest time, Rex said nothing. He walked around with that bullet head of his down, obviously deep in thought. When he finally looked up, those beady eyes fixed on me, and out it came. I've got it. We'll call it a tale. A tale is a story, an account, a yarn. This way we don't have to get all hung up on how much is true and how much is bogus. It's simply going to be one dog laying out a good story about something. You know, Duff, the way Mark Twain told us stories of Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. And how much better could it get? Here's a dog telling a tale, and what do all dogs have? We all have tales. Not wanting to burst his bubble, I hesitated before responding to what Rex obviously considered a brilliant idea he just had. But hadn't he inspected me closely when we first met? You know, the way dogs do. I'd yet to meet another of my species who didn't pay particularly close attention to the back end of every dog they met, sniffing away until they were sure this one was to be trusted. Had Rex not observed that all I had was a stub, not a real tail? Rex, I don't know if you really noticed, but when it comes to the posterior, I got the proverbial short end of the stick, or shall we say short end of the tail. Without even hesitating or coming up for air, Rex blurted out, "Perfect! Don't you see the irony, old chap? A dog without much of the one thing we all have, a tail, and here he is telling his tale. You know, readers just love writers who can alliterate. So we will call your masterpiece very simply, Duffy, the Tale of a Terrier." Well, I looked at him. "But how did you know my mama delivered 8 of us little terriers, Rex?" "I had no clue of the number of offspring, and I'm afraid you've lost me, old chap." So I replied to Rex, "You know, Rex, a litter of 8. You said readers liking writers from a litter of 8, and that was the exact number of us siblings, including yours truly." Well, Rex gave me a look like I'd just popped in from another planet, which is, of course, precisely what I just did. But ever the tactful one, I drew a long breath and tried to explain to him. "Oh, I now see the source of confusion, Duff. I said readers can alliterate. not those who came from a litter of rate. You see, logical as it might seem to alliterate, has nothing to do with litter stuff, or for that matter, the numeral 8. It means using words in a sentence that have the same initial sound. Tail of a terrier has just that sound. Wouldn't you say, Duff? Well, to illustrate for my tutor, Rex, that I grasped this wonderful notion of alliteration, I felt like blurting out that I was an embarrassed imbecile, but I decided not to belabor the point. So then they go on, Bobby, they go on to kind of nail down a few other things, but they did come up with this idea of the subtitle, The Tail of a Terrier. And just to come back to the kids, as I said, they learned about homophones in their writing workshop. Well, tail and tail. So they had to distinguish those two. And we talked, I remember at the workshop, I talked with them about all sorts of other homophones. They love giving their examples of them and so forth. And then we talked about that alliteration, that idea of tail and terrier starting out the same.
That's just amazing how you wove that all in. And then I've noticed you've done a lot of that where you do a little play on words.
Yes.
And from the dog's viewpoint, it really does make sense.
Mm-hmm.
It really is fun to read with all that in there. So I like that you've done that.
Thank you. Thank you. It was fun writing. I have to tell you that the play on words in writing in a dog's voice is a challenge on the one hand, but you know what? The reader has to look at it and understand from the beginning, which they do obviously, that this is a dog talking, and there's some human characteristics that come through, but also I think most people who read it truly feel as if this is probably what my dog's thinking a lot of the time.
Yeah, and you know, that's the way I was kind of interpreting it too, was I was thinking, well, what would the dog be thinking?
That's right.
And then, you know, those of us that are dog lovers and owners, we're always trying to figure out what they want. And they give us all these clues, and it was just tapping right into that part of me that, oh, that's like my dog.
That's right.
So that is just wonderful, the way you've written that.
Thank you.
So enjoyable. Now I was going to ask you where we could find your book.
Well, there's a lot of places that it's available. Before we talk about that specifically, and it'll kind of lead into that because it's tied to it in terms of where we're going to be, because wherever we're at, you'll find the book as well. Yes. We're going to be a couple places here in Hudson right during the month of November, coming up, in fact, next week. The Phipps will be having their Gift by the Hand show for their artists starting next Friday, November 9th. And this will be the second year that we will have Duffy available in the gift shop, and Melissa and I will be in there also volunteering and helping out. And just as an aside, I want to mention the Phipps because I know you've done programs with the Phipps and been a promoter of them. And I have to say, they've been a real friend of Duffy. I actually have done a lot of the writing of Duffy at the Phipps. I use space there and actually did come in very regularly and do my creative writing there. And so much when we talked all the way at the beginning of this segment about the inspiration, just being around the Phipps itself is an inspiration, as I think any of the artists that you've talked to can attest to. So I've kind of been, as we like to say, the writer in residence there, so to speak. And
that's wonderful. And they've taken it on and they're promoting you. And I love to promote the Phipps on this show. It's
a wonderful place. We call it the Gem on the River here in Hudson.
Yes,
it's just for a community of our size, a wonderful place. So in addition to the Phipps in November, again starting a week from tomorrow on the 9th, we're also going to be at Chapter 2 Books.
Right down on Main Street.
That's right, right down Main Street. We will be there tied in with the home tour this year. We've done various events in the past when the Spirit of St. Croix Days, we did a book signing, and this one is in conjunction with the weekend of the home tour, November 17th, Saturday, November 17th.
We have so many people going through at that time.
It should be a good turnout, and we're looking forward to it. We'll be there that day from 10 to noon in the morning, and obviously books available for signing and
Right.
talking with people who come in. I have to say that in terms of another gem, that bookstore opened up very shortly after Duffy came out in print.
yes.
And so it's been an incredible partnership to work with them at Chapter 2 and help promote Duffy. So those are two events coming up in the month of November. And then Melissa has us booked in a number of events during the month of December as we get ready for the holidays as well. Valley Bookseller in Stillwater, we're going to be up there doing a book signing in November. UWRF, down our friends in River Falls at the campus, has a monthly book club. And they have chosen Duffy as the selection for the month of December. And so
wonderful.
I'm going to not only come as the author of the book, but also as the moderator for the book club that month. And so we'll be down at UWRF, and then also at the Hazel Mackin Library in Roberts. Coming out to Roberts for their holiday open house in December. So, and then of course people can check the website for events because we add them all the time. We're always adding events.
Okay. And what is that website?
That website, and this is also, of course, Bobby, where people can easily go on and find a copy of the book to order. Our website is very easy, duffythedog.com.
Yes,
no
yes,
spaces
it's very
in
easy
there.
to go to it. I've done it recently. And it comes right to this page, and you can click on whatever you want to do. You can even read a sample.
You can read a sample chapter is available there. A listing of all of our events is updated regularly to show the places we're going to be, as well as it shows all of those events that we've done with shelters and libraries and bookstores over the last year and a half. But they can also, I should mention, if they order a book from duffythedog.com, if we've decided if you put in at checkout the code CABLE for the cable channel we're doing today, they can get 20% off. So that's a great way to
That's huge.
order the book. Yes, so it's available through that website. Both local bookstores, as I said, Valley and Stillwater, Chapter 2 right here in Hudson. National chains carry the book. And of course, if your bookstore that you have where you may be in western Wisconsin doesn't have it, there's an ISBN number associated with the book where they can go on and order the book as well. BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon.com. And then just to mention, we are in the Moore Library system that our Hudson Library is part of for this part of the state. There's copies of Duffy circulating around in the Moore Library system as well. So.
Wow, that's great exposure.
It sure is.
And I think very easy for people to find and to get to those. So if they can't, they can always go on the website.
That's right.
But it's very easy to do that. I didn't have any trouble at all. And that's where I got the first chapter.
Terrific. Yeah, we decided early on that in setting up a website, when you're asking earlier about this whole process of publishing a book, you find out all of the things necessary, including getting a website set up and working with the technical people who can help you do that, but then also the design of it. And we decided early on that, especially with a dog's voice, it would be good to let readers sample it. And so they're able to read the first chapter online and also find out the events and see a picture of the star of the show. I always like to say Duffy was very photogenic, as you can see.
Oh, yes, here. Yes, I do agree with you. I think you've definitely got just a star there. So this is wonderful because it's just promoting him and how he can live on.
Well, that was the idea, let him live on beyond his life on Earth. So.
And I should ask you, how much does the book cost?
The book retails for $22.95. But as I said, one way is to get it through the website at a 20% discount.
That's huge. And then I do believe the FIPS gives a discount to members.
Yes, they do.
for the Gift by the Hand show, and I usually do go there every year, and I think the members do enjoy that discount.
I'm sure they do.
So, and I want to mention that because with the holidays coming, I think this would be a wonderful gift.
Absolutely.
I mean, for a child and right on up, like you say.
We found that, Bobby, that it is a gift book. I'm interested that you happen to pick up on that, right? I think anyone who literally picks up the book, I don't know if I would have called that a surprise, as we were talking about earlier, working with these kids, but it's got a feel to it, the book, with the way it was designed and the beautiful cover that was designed for the book, that people gravitate towards it. And we found that to be the case, that unlike maybe in what I will call a novel written in a person's voice, where, gee, a person buys one copy and then passes it on or circulates it. We've had any number of cases, especially around holiday periods, where someone comes to the bookstore and walks out with multiple copies because they want it for this person, that person. And of course, as you know, very often, of course, it goes to a dog lover. As I've signed the books over the past year, I have to say I'll sometimes be signing them in memory of a dog that's been lost.
That's very
Other
special.
times in honor of their current dog at home. But invariably, when I put a personal inscription on the book, there's a dog involved.
Oh, yes. Definitely. Now, I see you've gotten some kind of award here. What is this?
Yes, we did. That was just a thrill to receive that. That's was called the Next Generation Indie Book Awards, and Duffy was a finalist in one of the categories for pets in the Next Gen Indie Awards. We had a thrill of going to New York when the awards were presented for that book. So it's really a neat experience for me, as well as my wife, to go off to New York and have it, you said earlier, having Duffy live on, to think that he was there with us in spirit. And so, yes, we've received a number of accolades, and something of that sort that you can literally put as a sticker and show people that this is received some very good publicity. Has been a very nice outcome from this process.
Well, it's been out a year and a half?
It has, just about a year and a half.
Well, that's just amazing.
Yes, it has been.
And you've already won that award, and, you know, I can't believe all the promotion you've done and are doing for it, and I just think it's obviously going to be a top book. I mean, everybody's going to really enjoy it, and I hope that talking about it today will inspire people to read it and buy it, and maybe even go down to some of these events we talked about today.
Well, thank you. And I just, in closing, I'd like to say that I totally agree. I hope it inspires many of the readers in this part of the state to pick it up and want to read it. But I also hope, coming back to the kids one last time, that having written this and them getting involved in reading it, it inspires them to continue with their writing and their love not only of writing but of reading as well. But I appreciate the opportunity to do this.
Well, if this can open the key to reading for a lot of those children out there, that's another benefit.
Absolutely.
And Gary, I've just enjoyed talking to you so much.
Well, thank you.
And learning about the book and learning more and more, and I'm just inspired to read.
Great.
More just from this excerpts and the way you described it. So I hope that our audience enjoyed it, and I hope that they will definitely check it out. And I know the holidays are coming, and I'm starting to think about that myself. So we hope you enjoyed the show today. And again, I want to thank Gary for being on the show.
Thank you.